Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Doing Well. And on this week's episode, we are going to talk about regulating yourself to break unhealthy habits. I don't know about you, but I actually need this conversation right now. This applies to me because I have a lot of unhealthy habits that I need to manage and eventually break. And today we have Melissa in our virtual studio, who is a wonderful guest who's been smiling since the start. So I would love to talk to her about this topic. And also she is very experienced in this area because she is a registered counselor and clinical member with the Singapore Association of Counselling and has had a decade of experience working in community mental health in a psychiatric rehabilitation setting, journeying with people struggling with mental health related challenges like depression, anxiety, psychoses, who presented with a range of concerns, including work stress and burnout, trauma, interpersonal relationship difficulties, grief and loss, and difficulties adapting to transitions in life. Currently, Melissa is the founder and psychotherapist of MY Therapy, a practice she founded to continue to support individuals, couples, and families navigate the path to authenticity and meaningful relationships in an attachment-focused and trauma-informed way. Thank you so much for joining us today, Melissa.
Thank you, Lu. Thank you for the intro.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's so impressive. I was reading it and I was like, wow, you work with a lot of different types of people and support a lot of different conditions. So, you definitely have a wealth of knowledge to share with us today, especially because, I'm sure when we talk about things like depression, anxiety, psychoses, and trauma and things related to such topics, people that suffer with these things, and I know I myself, I'm dealing with it on a daily basis, we have unhealthy habits as byproducts of whatever it is that we're going through. And it's really hard to break these bad habits, even though we know that, like once we can do that, our life would be improved and our well-being would be enhanced. It's not that easy. So that's what we're here to talk about today. And also it is a conversation that applies to a lot of people because, even people that don't suffer from depression, anxiety, and other related mental health issues, we all have bad habits that we can break. I think not one person on this planet will go, I actually don't have any bad habits whatsoever. We all have things like little quirks here and there and things that we need to sort of break up with, as I like to say it. So we'll find out more about that in the next part of the conversation. But for now, let's get to know you a bit better because, this is a very impressive background. And I'm sure you've worked with so many different people. But I could also sort of imagine that this is not an easy line of work to be in because, you're dealing with things that are not easy to talk about, not easy to deal with. And it can also sort of like, it can bring a lot of pressure on yourself. So why did you choose this line of work and how did you get here?
Okay. Thank you for asking that question. I mean, definitely, it's really challenging but rewarding at the same time. And I agree with you. This journey requires quite a lot of self-regulation. So actually, I'm really excited about the topic that we're going to talk about. But if you were to ask me how I started, actually, I wanted to come into this field from a really, really young age, maybe about 13. From that moment, I wanted to support people who were being stigmatized at that point in time. And way back 20 years ago, okay, I sound old now, but 20 years ago, like the field of mental health was still quite stigmatized. Like a lot of people didn't really know what it was about. And when people were diagnosed, they were sort of shunned and people were afraid of them. So I wanted to go into this field to kind of support them and also spread the awareness that these are fellow human beings who are struggling in certain ways and might not know how to, let's say, regulate in a healthier way. So I wanted to depathologize that whole field. So, and then that went into a completely focused study track just to do psychology and then counseling. And then that's where I am right now.
Oh wow. What a career journey so far, right? It's certainly, it was so interesting for me every time I hear anyone talk about their career, like how they sort of navigated through all the different things that they had to do earlier on for them to get to a particular point in their journey. And for you, it sounds like you're really passionate about this area of work, even though it's challenging. You find it rewarding, and I think that's just beautiful because recently I've gotten really into psychology. I love it as a field, which is why I'm hosting this podcast in the first place. But it's a field that is not easy to get into, and I know that because I talk to a lot of friends. I've got a good friend who is in psychology right now and still going through the educational process. It's not something that is easy to get into, and definitely not easy to keep going. So yeah, I think it's admirable, and really amazing to hear your story. And we would love to get to know you even better. And we have this section where we called "Have You Met Melissa?" We're going to get to know you through some of your favorite things. First of all, what is a book you have been enjoying lately?
Okay. Well, I love reading. That's one of my main hobbies. So I'm going to share a book that maybe it's not so recently published, but it's a classic. Have you heard of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning?
Yes, I
Okay,
have. I love
I
that book.
love it's such a beautiful piece of work. I love the the underlying tenets of it. The fact that, as long as we have meaning and purpose, no matter how much adversities or challenges that come across in life, we're able to pull through it and even through traumatic circumstances come out of it with a sense of growth. So I love the assumptions of that. And I love how the first 10 accounts of his experiences in those harrowing, traumatic kind of piece at the concentration camps. So I would completely recommend this book.
Yeah, definitely. I love that because a lot of the guests on this show actually have talked about the book. And I remember I get mixed up between the two shows that I'm hosting here at LMSL. But it's either this show or Zero Boost. On one of the episodes, the guest was saying that Viktor Frankl was probably the first person to set the foundation for the relationship between purpose in life and well-being, or happiness. I can't remember exactly now because it gets blurred in my head. But that was certainly interesting because purpose in life is a new area in psychology. I find, after his book was published, and for us nowadays as well, there's a really strong emphasis on living and working with purpose, right? And I think that is probably the beginning to all of this, and it's actually it's something to think about a lot in the context of well-being, and I'm sure that's why you love the book as well, right? Because it's so relatable, and I think it's something that everyone can use as a tool, because life can get really challenging sometimes. Even if you love your work, it gets really hard. And so remembering the purpose of why you did it in the first place and give the meaning to it and the meaning to life in general, it's a very helpful way to navigate through challenges.
Definitely. It helps us to hold on to hope as well. Something
Mm.
more positive amidst whatever negative things that are going on.
Yeah, 100%. Book-wise, we can probably go on all day. I love reading as well, but also would love to know about your favorite movie recently.
Okay. This is a recent movie. It's Mission Impossible.
Ah,
I love stunts and action. I'm a little bit of an adrenaline junkie myself, so I love Tom Cruise scenes where it looks really harrowing, and it just excites me, gets me going.
yeah. Oh, that's good. I haven't seen that one. I meant to go see it, but then I just never got the time. But yeah, that's a good one. Thank you for sharing that. And this next question is about podcasts. Obviously, you're our guest today, but I don't know if you actually listen to podcasts yourself, and if you do, what is your favorite one?
I actually rarely listen to podcasts.
Okay.
I listen to podcasts when I'm maybe on the go, like on transport. So I generally, contrary to, let's say, my line of work, I like to listen to more lighthearted podcasts. So just for a laugh and things like that. There is one that was is actually created or published in Malaysia. It's called Table Talk, but they've sort of kind of stopped a while. So just talking about current affairs, but in a really lighthearted manner. I don't really watch the news, so it's a good way for me to catch
Mm,
up. But there are a couple of mental health podcasts that I listen to. Like
yeah.
in Singapore, it's called Hush, and there is this podcast called Are You Okay? So these are a couple of podcasts that I kind of alternate listening to.
Mm, yeah. Beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing. Those are actually quite a few recommendations, even though you say you don't
Yeah.
listen to it that often. That's good. So you still know a few ones. That's good to know. Um, Now, I'm wondering if you have a role model or multiple role models, and if so, who are they?
I do have role models. I kind of categorize them into professional role model and non-professional role models.
Okay.
So the professional one, I would have to say it would be Bessel van der Kolk. Have you heard of him?
Yes. Is
Okay.
he's the author of,
The
oh gosh, that book.
the body keeps the score.
Yes, The Body Keeps the Score. I was like, I know the book name, and then like when you need to say it out loud, you just blank. Yeah.
I love him because he's really dedicated to the trauma field. He's been in the field researching, speaking, training for 40 plus years. So I admire the dedication and his against all odds kind of way just to push trauma into the mainstream and letting more people know about it. So that's the reason why I love him. I go for a
Yeah.
lot of his talks, trainings, just to keep abreast of things. He's of a certain age, but he's still full of power and passion. So I want to get there one day.
Yeah, that is really inspiring.
Then for the non-professional side, my personal role models, it's about the same reason why I like them, the same dedication. So Tom Cruise, one of them,
Okay. Very consistent. I love that.
because I loved him because I don't know whether you saw this one behind the scenes kind of casting of the Mission Impossible movie. He was doing a stunt and he broke his leg while doing a stunt, but he just finished the scene.
Oh,
So I
wow.
thought that was wow. I mean, self-care perspective, probably not that great, but in terms of the dedication, it's just that desire to really, pull things through, to not give up. I think that's really, really admirable.
Yeah. Wow, that is cool. Thank you for sharing that. Um, And finally, in this part, I would love to get to know you through education. Now, probably been a while since you did went to uni and things like that. But I wonder if throughout this whole process, you've sort of done more courses, and if you have, what is a course you completed that has really inspired you?
Okay. I am an advocate of lifelong learning, and I think from I read up a little bit about you and Lu, that's you as well, where education going.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I actually continuously take courses from PESI, PSI Online. So I did this course on internal family systems, and I think this is it's a fantastic course that really is in line with my belief about depathologizing mental health and being more accepting and non-judging about the different parts of us and how it goes about integrating these different parts. So that training was inspiring, and if we have time, I would love to talk more about that later.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds really fascinating. And, we have a whole open mic section if you want to talk about that in detail. But for now, we have got to know you a bit better. So let's talk about today's topic. I mentioned earlier that I don't know about our audience, but for me, this topic is definitely going to benefit me as I have to, got to do a lot of self work, including breaking my bad habits. So, in the context of well-being, habits obviously impact our well-being. The good habits, enhance it. Bad habits make it worse. But before we get to the part where we actually talk about how we are going to break the bad habits, let's talk about well-being. This show is about well-being, and each guest has a very different perspective of it. I love hearing these perspectives. So, what does well-being mean to you, Melissa?
Okay. I'm sure you've had so many different definitions by now. And
Yep.
then for me, well-being, it's kind of be a paragraph of description. So it's for me, it's a sense of groundedness. It's a sense of contentment. And it is when we are aligned with our values. So most of the time, it also involves cultivating loving and compassionate relationships with ourselves as well as others. So there are a few components to well-being that, for me,
Yeah.
that fits.
Yeah, yeah, I love that definition. Like I love hearing all these definitions. No matter how many I've heard, the more I hear them, the more I get perspectives. And today, you're reminding me about our relationship with ourselves as well as others. That's important. And I think for me, when we talk about the topic of breaking bad habits, there's that strong emphasis of relationship with yourself. And it is actually something that's quite important in the context of well-being. The relationship we have with ourselves, sometimes we disregard it. I know for a fact that, like when I was a teenager growing up, or even in my early 20s, I would probably be like, oh, like, I love myself. I'm great. No, not really. I've grown to know that, yeah, I love myself and I'm great as a person, but I have a lot to improve. And sometimes I myself would not observe the bad habits that I actually have. It takes a lot of self awareness. It takes a lot of self work to be able to understand, oh, you know what? This thing that I continuously do, this is not great. And I need to work on that. And it will help with my well being. If I feel like I'm a little off here and there, I'm not feeling great, there's got to be something going on the inside, not necessarily just with health or, relationship wise. And sometimes this is the interesting part about your definition that it kind of got to me. Like sometimes when I notice that my relationship with other people, for example, family, friends, if they're not going well, there's something going on with my relationship with myself. So they're kind of interrelated. And I think that probably will really help because we're talking about self regulation today, right? And that is important for all relationships. Yeah. So we'll go there very soon. But I wonder what you think to be some of the biggest misconceptions people have about well being. I'm sure you've seen a bunch because you work with so many.
Right. I would say the off the top of my head, the first one would definitely be uh this clients who can I say that well-being is permanent. So once you achieve it, then you're literally set. You're there for life. And sometimes it's almost like I hear a lot of questions like, okay, give me strategies that I can do immediately, and then right now I'm gonna feel this sense of well-being. For me, that's unfortunately that is a misconception. It's like we're constantly on a journey to reach that state of well-being, but then because life is also it's like an ebb and flow, so we're inevitably gonna come out of that state of well-being, and then we're gonna go back again. So if we hold on to that sense of once I reach there and then I'm set, then generally what happens is that we kind of lose that being mindful and that continued care for ourselves, and then things start to fall apart. So that's the first major misconception that I find. And then another one, which is also very common, is that some people think that by focusing on well-being, that's actually being selfish. And I want to say that that is so far from the truth because oftentimes people who say that, generally, they tell me okay, because there are a lot of things in their external environment. Maybe I'm a caregiver. Maybe I feel like I have a lot of responsibilities that I need to take care of. But if you think about it, I'm in my body and I am doing these caretaking responsibilities from this body that I have. So if I'm running low, I'm not going to be able to actually meet or fulfill those responsibilities. So if you turn it the other way around, if I am wanting to be there for you, I gotta be there for myself first to make sure that I have enough in my tank to be with you.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. I think there's this really big movement of self care going on, and that is a beautiful thing. But I think that the key to it, just like you're saying, is, you got to fill our tank first, right? To take care of others. And speaking of filling our tank, when we're filling our tank, we'll notice a bunch of areas we need to work on, and we'll notice that we need self-regulation for that to happen. I think for me and you, like I've been really interested in this area of psychology. You work in the field, so it's probably really quite easy for us to catch on to the term of self-regulation. But for our audience, if they're clicking on this, chances that this is new to them, like they have no idea what that is about. So what is self-regulation exactly? When do we need it? And why is it important for our well-being?
So emotional regulation and self-soothing are terms that are a little bit more prevalent either in articles or the media nowadays. So those are synonyms actually, so we could interchangeably use them. And I would say self-regulation, a lot of us, whether we're consciously aware or not, we're actually regulating ourselves on pretty much an hourly, if not minute by minute basis. Like if you're grabbing a coffee because you're tired, that's actually a way of self-regulating. You're introducing energy into your system. If you're anxious and you're kind of pacing around, or you notice yourself taking deep breaths, that is also a way of self-regulating. So it's, even though it looks like a big word, but if we look clearly at, our daily lives, every one of us is actually engaging in some form of self-regulation. Then kind of let me introduce something that, since this is well-being science, so I'm just going to introduce a couple of terms. Maybe you've heard of it before and our listeners have, but I wonder whether you've heard of this term called the window of tolerance.
No, I haven't. That's new.
This is a term by this researcher called Dan Siegel. So this is talking about, let's say, all of us have this window where if we're in it, then it's an optimal engagement state. So if we're in it, we are feeling this groundedness, we're feeling this calm. And so if we're moving out the window, that's when we go into what we call the hyperarousal state. So this is when we start to feel the anxiety, the panic. It's almost so much energy in our body and the agitation. And when we're in that state, we're not really feeling that calmness anymore. That's that panic state. But then if we can go above the window, we can also go below the window. So below the window, it's something called a hypoarousal state. So when we're in that state, these are days where, let's say, you feel completely low energy, you can't even move, don't have this motivation to go about the day. So throughout our lives, or even throughout a single day, things might happen that move us out of this window into the hyperarousal state or the hypoarousal state. So self-regulation is all about bringing us back to that window of tolerance so that we can live life and engage people aligned with our values. So that was my definition of well-being.
Yeah.
So that's one concept that I wanted to introduce so that we can kind of keep coming back to this, because a lot of the strategies that we're going to talk about later, it's either coming back down from hyperarousal or coming out of that hypoarousal.
Very interesting. Definitely something new that I've learned today, window of tolerance. That is a new terminology. Never heard of that before. And yeah, I think it's quite easy to understand. So definitely hope that our audience can pick that up and apply to their own situation and kind of observe where they are at, whether it's within the window, above or below that. Now, you were talking about like the importance of self-regulation and how it means different things, and people probably have heard of other terminologies before. This is something that we actually already do. So the key is not whether we are doing it or not, but whether we're actually doing it right. I feel like self-regulation, if we are going in that direction, can be a little bit dangerous, because some people might say, oh yeah, like when I feel low, I self-regulate with a tub of ice cream. And that could be really dangerous, because that I think that it's probably classified as unhealthy coping, which I have done on some occasions. So, I'm also guilty of that. I'm not saying that this is like I'm perfect and I know how to do this, but I know that it can be dangerous from my own personal observation. So, what are the different types of self-regulation? Would that be like, would there be the good kinds and the bad kinds, or would there be the different types of self-regulation that are scientifically there for people to kind of know and pick up?
Okay. Lu, I want to pick up on what you said about like the ice cream first before I go into the types.
Okay.
If you think about it, technically, healthy and unhealthy coping strategies, it's really a construct, because how do we determine what is healthy or unhealthy?
Mm.
Because my perspective is more of like, let's say, depathologizing. So I don't inherently really see whether a coping strategy is healthy or unhealthy, but I go back to the definition of whether it's aligned to your values. So let's say if you value having a healthy body or a fit body, then technically turning to ice cream every single time I feel anxious or distressed, then it might not be a good thing. And same thing goes with, let's say, scrolling social media. A lot of people do that. I mean, if I'm feeling so tired or so anxious, then I end up, scrolling and hours go by. But then at the end of the day, I really want to kind of put this question to them. Do they really feel better? Or it's almost like a distraction or a numbing, that I don't technically feel the shift from feeling distressed to feeling good. I just stop feeling distressed. Which, if we're going to sort of come back to this later, that's not really self-regulation. That's just numbing and sort of cutting yourself off, which does not do well for your relationship with your body, because you're literally cutting it off, actually.
Yeah.
So if I go back to your question of the major types of strategies, I find it helpful for myself, let's say, to categorize it into a few distinct categories, so that our listeners will also be able to kind of follow it a little bit better. So let's say I'm gonna kind of separate it into bio, psycho, social, and then I'm gonna add a spiritual. So 4 categories in general. So if we start with bio, then it's something related to a body-based kind of physiological regulation. So this is about things that you do that will help to kind of your body to feel different immediately. First thing that comes to mind, exercise. That's something that, definitely when we start doing, you feel a difference physiologically, because the endorphins are pumping, you're sweating it out. I don't know about you, but, when I actually, let's say, go for a run or go for a racquetball game after a really stressful day, I do feel better after it, even though nothing technically has changed in the situation that caused me stress. But that's something that kind of regulates the body. And actually, food is another way of regulating, because chocolates or, some even alcohol, actually, it kind of introduces the endorphins, and it kind of calms it down. I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying that it's one of the ways that people kind of use, definitely, to regulate the distress. Mm-hmm. So anything related to kind of a body-based activity, meaning even if I can't think that day, I can still do it and I feel better. That's under the bio regulation strategy. And if we move to psychological, then mainly we're talking about two kinds, the cognitive strategies and emotional strategies. So if I start with cognitive, this will be things like self-talk, positive self-talk. Like, hey, you're doing well, you're okay, you've got this. These are all ways that kind of we talk to ourselves before it starts. And I know I did this before we started talking to each other. I'm telling myself, okay, I'm gonna do okay. I'm not gonna let my anxiety overrun. But it's these ways of sort of using our reason or our logic, like let's say reminding ourselves of past experiences of success, is going to help us pull through and kind of regulate the anxiety that we're feeling at the moment. So that's the cognitive part. So the emotional regulation part, I would think actually this is the part that needs the most practice, and but this is the part that potentially is the most crucial aspect of developing a relationship with ourselves. Because emotional regulation would involve understanding what I'm feeling that caused me to engage in the unhealthy behavior in the first place. So I need to look at, let's say, before I reached out for that scoop of ice cream, what was my emotional state like? Was I feeling anxious? Was I feeling low and sad? And then identifying the emotion and sort of linking it to what happened, so that for myself, I'm building a narrative of understanding what triggers lead to feeling a certain emotions. And that's the first step. Understanding is definitely the first step. But then after understanding, and I can't just stop that because I'm still feeling kind of crummy about it. So I think the beautiful part is that if we take emotions as almost like messengers, every single emotion actually has a message for us. So it signifies an underlying need. Let's say if I'm feeling sad, most of the time I'm actually in touch with a sense of loss of something, whether it's an opportunity, whether it's a relationship, whether it's an expectation that got disappointed. I'm experiencing a sense of loss, and the need in that sadness is generally to grieve that loss. And I can do that, myself, or I can do that calling a friend up and kind of just speaking to them about what happened. But if we are able to kind of access the need underlying the emotion, then I would say that we're set, actually. But then the entire sort of education about the different types of emotion, what do they mean, that process, for some people, let's see if they've been exposed to people or relationships, early relationships who have taught them certain emotions and what they mean, and they are held in that experience. Those people are probably more, let's say, able to identify emotions. But then for others, it might be difficult, even just identifying it. So sometimes it would be helpful to, let's say, go for therapy just to kind of understand, let's see, what's happening inside. But that doesn't necessarily need to happen. Then the first step to emotional regulation is definitely identifying, understanding. Then after that, if you can meet the need of whatever emotion you're feeling, that is regulation, actually. So let me just give you one more example. I use sadness. So let's say I'm going to use anger, another very common emotion. So if I'm angry, generally it's it's because my boundaries are being violated in whatever aspect. It might be physical boundaries, it might be psychological boundaries, but my boundaries are being violated, so I'm angry. So, Lu, let me kind of check with you. Like, what do you think is the corresponding action? Let's say if I feel like my boundaries are being violated.
I think it depends on the situation. Like if you are conversing with someone and then you feel like, your boundaries are violated, you might start yelling,
Okay.
screaming, like I don't know, depending on the situation. Or sometimes if you're by yourself, like um when something happened, I'm just trying to think of a situation where I've been really angry. Like I think the last time I was really angry, when I was looking at a message, I just threw my phone across the room and then walked away from that. So that's what I did.
Okay. So that was the immediate kind of action that came
Yeah.
out, acting from that emotion of anger.
Yeah.
But let's say, if I were to challenge you to kind of look at the need that we have when you experience a violation,
Mm.
because you were talking about healthy versus unhealthy, right?
Yeah.
Let's say you're not happy with you throwing your phone across the room.
Yeah.
And then what do you think kind of might be a healthier way that would meet that need of being violated?
Hmm. See, now that you're saying healthy is kind of like a loosely used terms, because what is actually healthy anyway?
Precisely.
Yeah, like I think when I'm angry, like I probably will let it out when I work out, like it's probably not immediate. So if I could, in the immediate way I would deal with it is probably go for a walk. But, if the situation doesn't permit, I'll probably like let it out later on in the day, whether it be like going for a long walk or maybe go to a gym class and just lift weights or whatever. Like that helps. Um, that's for me. Yeah.
Because so you're talking about discharging the anger.
Mm,
And let's say if we look at emotional regulation, the the need underlying feeling violated is to set boundaries, to kind of like re-establish that boundaries and kind of tell the other person, hey, you stepped in, like
mm,
get back out in a way. So let's say if that isn't being done and we discharge the anger through whatever coping strategies, even healthy ones like exercise, at the very end of the day, the core issue that made us angry is not addressed, actually. We're still going to get
yeah.
angry if the same thing happens again.
True.
So if we're looking at a more sustainable kind of solution, like I would say we would have to work slowly towards reestablishing the boundaries and communicating that. Because only when that's done, then you're actually reducing the chance of anger resurfacing again. Because if not, it's almost like I'm just pressing down that emotion that I
Mm,
know it's going to keep happening because the situation keeps calling for it.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, that is another way to look at it. I didn't think about that. I immediately just think about like yelling at that person for whatever they did. But yeah, I do agree because, yeah, now that I think about it, after I threw my phone across the room, I obviously messaged the person back and I was like, that's not cool. Like, I do not agree with the way that you said it. Anyway, long story short, we sorted that out. And that was the way of me reestablishing my boundary. And I think it's something that is helpful, because sometimes when you're really angry, so this is another, just talking about the example, it doesn't apply to all situations, but when you're really angry and you need to have that level of self-regulation, I feel like sometimes it's good to let it out immediately and then come back to it to resolve the situation. Because I find that for me, like if I try to establish my boundary straight away, um, I might say what I didn't mean. So that's kind of like just me personally, because I get pretty fired up when I'm angry and when people violate my boundaries, and I tend to kind of like say things that I don't mean, and then that just makes the situation even worse. So I think it depends on our level of self-awareness as well, like how we deal with situations, because we all know what to do and what the best course of action is, but it doesn't mean that we can apply that straight away.
Definitely. I
Yeah.
completely agree with you, because what you're talking about actually links to that window of tolerance. Because if
Mm.
you're above, and you were definitely above with that activation,
Yeah.
you need to kind of come back down to that window of tolerance before you can actually calmly set your boundaries. So
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you. You got to do whatever you need to do to kind of help yourself calm down. Just that I would recommend that after that, then maybe, look at something that would be more sustainable for yourself, so that in the long run, that's actually a form of self-care, to kind
Yeah.
of set boundaries or protection for yourself to
Mm.
reduce your sense of vulnerability.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's a practice. It's not something that you can master in a day. Theoretically, it all sounds great, but if someone was to listen to this conversation and they kind of go, okay, now I have to, make sure I, notice the window like of tolerance where I am and, do all that thing. It really depends on each situation. And I feel like this is just my observation when it comes to life, right? It sounds great and we all know what to do, but in reality, we kind of have to mess up a few times to learn, because we will deal with different situations where we are going to, come across different ways that we self regulate. And I'm trying to say this because I find that for myself, like this year in particular, has been quite eye opening in terms of understanding how I deal with different situations. And I just know that my coping strategies sometimes are not that healthy, because today we're talking about breaking bad habits, right? You have to recognize the bad habits before you break them. If you don't know that you have bad habits, you cannot break them. And I think for me, it's a really big part of this process of like understanding how to self regulate in a healthy way, whatever healthy might be, and to kind of like break away from those bad habits, is to be really kind to myself in saying, because if I mess up and I'm like, oh, I self-regulated by, having alcohol, which I have done. Just gonna be very honest with the audience, because I think people that are listening to this, they might deal with the same thing. And I don't feel great about it the day after. And, like it felt great in the moment. But it doesn't feel great the day after on most occasions. Sometimes it's fun to drink with friends. But then when I realized, oh, you know what, that's not great. Why did I do that to myself? Like, why did I spend money on alcohol? I should have saved money, blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, wait, hang on a minute, Lou, stop. It's okay. That was, to me, self-compassion in the process of learning to self-regulate in a way that is healthy for me to break the bad habits. It is a mouthful, but that's just like how I see this journey unfolding for each person, because I do think that is a learning curve. It's not something that you kind of like, oh, I'm going to pick up self-regulation as a skill, and I'm going to deal with everything in a nice way and in a healthy manner. I I don't think that can be achieved because we're all humans. So I would love to kind of hear your thoughts on the role of self-compassion in the role of all of this, especially when it comes to breaking bad habits, because a lot of people might beat themselves up for not doing the right thing, self-regulation wise.
Mhm. I love that you brought this up, because I want to kind of reinforce to our listeners that definitely self-regulation is not something as simple as, let's say, do this strategy, do this skill, because it sometimes it takes months, years of kind of practicing, refining, because what self-regulation works for one person might not be the same strategy or kind of routine that works for another person. We got to figure that out for ourselves. So we're going to make mistakes along the way, and do like what you say, self-compassion, being kind to ourselves when we inevitably make mistakes. That is so crucial, because if you think about it, the opposite of self-compassion, that's criticism. And criticism is an internal attack on myself. So if I'm attacking myself, how am I supposed to feel calm and grounded and connected? Because if I'm attacking myself, I'm going to go into defense mode. So either I'm going to feel this sense of shame I'm going to feel this sense of, oh, I feel worse than before. I feel distressed. And then guess what? Now I need to self-regulate even more because I just added on that attack
Yeah.
on myself
Yeah.
while I'm reaching for whatever that gives me comfort. So
Yeah.
it doesn't actually help me get out or regulate myself to go to that sense of calm. So actually self-compassion, I would say, if we look at self-regulation, self-compassion is the number 2 step, the big step towards helping us in our journey to self-regulation. Because number 1 was mindfulness. Like Lu, you mentioned, you became mindful of what are certain bad habits you did. When you do these bad habits, we got to first draw our attention to these things. Because unfortunately, a lot of us can just go through life in that kind of routine habit. And sometimes we don't really know what happened. And then the end of the day comes, or we find ourselves, let's say, reaching for that ice cream, reaching for that alcohol. And once we feel better, like, we don't actually go back to looking at what actually happened. So even that space of just being able to say, hey, this happened to me. Hey, I'm not feeling so good. That in itself is a huge step. And I always tell clients that don't take that for granted, because when you're able to pause and talk about what happened for you, then that's the first step towards regulating, because in that moment, you're not dysregulated. When you're dysregulated, you can't really look at what's happening to yourself. So mindfulness, that's the first one. And self-compassion, after I notice what's happening, am I going to blame myself for that? Why the heck did you do that again? You horrible person. Like, it's almost like saying to myself, like, okay, hey, I know that this is probably not what I hoped to do, but then I also know that I reached out for this comfort because this happened to me and I'm feeling really lousy about myself right now. So I understand. And it's almost like holding yourself by the hand or even giving yourself a hug and then moving potentially towards something else that is more, let's say, an action that if you did, the next day you won't be feeling guilty about whatever it is.
Yeah.
So self-compassion definitely is really, really important, because it is having that loving relationship with yourself that sometimes we turn to externally when we're struggling. We go to our friends who, if they support us, then we find that, hey, we might not actually need to turn to those behaviors that we don't want to. So why not create that internally? If we can't really find somebody else at that point in time, let's say it's 3 a.m. in the morning, if you're able to hold yourself and can it be that loving friend, that compassionate person, then in that moment, you're going to find that it brings you back to that window of tolerance, actually.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because sometimes we forget that self-regulation doesn't just have to do with us. Sometimes it's kind of in relation to how we interact with others, because the word self there is kind of, some people might go, oh, self-regulation, just do that by myself. I kind of think it doesn't really work like that, just, individually, even though, yes, it is self-regulation, but you kind of have to do that in collaboration with other people in your lives. You might, for example, turn to a friend and talk about a situation, rather than, like, reach for alcohol. That is a way to self-regulate, because it helps. Like, I know that for me, definitely, sometimes it's good to talk things out. It's so helpful. And I think another thing that I find to be extremely helpful in the context of this topic, like breaking unhealthy habits and self-regulation, it actually helps to have like accountability buddy. In the sense that, like, you have like all these strategies that you want to implement, right? But it's hard because you're breaking bad habits. It's not that easy when you're by yourself. and you have all these healthier self-regulation strategies, but no one's going to police you. You're an adult. Most of the time, people who are listening to the show, they probably are adults, young adults at the very least. We don't really live in an environment where people are telling us what to do, like parents are telling us, okay, you should do this, you should do that. It doesn't work like that. And I think for me, having an accountability buddy has really helped. Like, I would say, this is what I plan to do to self-regulate next
Yeah.
time, or this is what I plan to do from now on, and they need to keep me accountable, and that really helps.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
And because if you think about it, the cliche saying "no man is an island," that is completely true. Like,
Yeah.
we do need that connection. And if you think about it, sometimes if my energy is running low, or that discipline kind of energy is low, if I turn to somebody and I can borrow their strength or their energy, oh, that's going to help me so much. So I completely agree with you. Self-regulation, it's not only about doing things myself to regulate myself, but it's more of like, I would say, technically doing things to help you regulate yourself. So doing things would also, or might also, involve reaching out to somebody that you know is going to be there for you, that will support you in your journey towards your goals.
Yeah, totally. That is so important. And I do love that, we've talked about this topic in, a very scientific manner, where you mentioned the different strategies earlier. I think one caveat there, though, is it all starts from self-awareness. Once again, like, you can't really break that habit or self-regulate to that window of tolerance if you don't know where you're at. And I think that's where a lot of people are kind of like, oh, like, I am finding this hard to navigate, so let's get a bit more practical. So, we have talked about quite a few different aspects of self-regulation, and now let's talk about a practice, something that is small enough for people to start practicing, but also probably big enough to make an impact when they start to embark on this journey of, self-regulate better. So what would be a practice that you would recommend to our audience? Let's say they are really new to this and they have found themselves struggling. They just don't know where to start and they would like to self-regulate better. What should they try?
Okay. Well, going with, Lu, what you mentioned about self-awareness, I would say, let's say that's the place to start. I know that on this podcast, quite a lot of guests have talked about mindfulness.
Yeah.
So I'm going to weave that in.
Okay.
Technically, when, let's say, in a practice that I'm going to recommend for self-regulation, it doesn't necessarily need to be a formal meditation practice, but it's something along the lines of, I start to be curious about, let's say, what are some of the behaviors that I feel guilty after I do them? Because then that draws your attention to the bad habits that we're talking about. And then I'm going to encourage for clients who, let's say, are comfortable with writing, to look at journaling the thoughts, emotions, like situation that triggered the behavior in the first place. So starting to compile like a list of triggers and situations that they're able to see, these are the things that cause me to become dysregulated. And then after that, look at the theme of that, because different situations might cause the same behavior. And then we kind of look at it like, oh, okay, but these are generally not isolated incidents. If you look at the theme, maybe, let's say, the theme is feeling a sense of rejection. Maybe it's feeling a sense of fear of being evaluated. So if I can identify the theme for me, then firstly, I'm going to know in advance what kind of situations in the future probably going to kind of trigger the same theme. And then I'm going to set up like a system to support myself through that process. So I know you said the first like one practice, but then I was feeling the the kind of desire to just stretch it a little bit. So let's say
Yeah, go for it.
after the self-awareness, because I'm sharing this because this is exactly what I do for myself. So after the self-awareness, then this second part is something that I spend maybe even months kind of developing. So it is like a toolbox of different strategies that I've found work for myself to either calm me down from that hyperarousal state or get me out of the hypoarousal state. So this is a period of time where I want to encourage our listeners to experiment doing different things and see whether it helps you to either relax or it helps you to kind of feel more energetic. And there are so many strategies floating around on the internet. If you just Google, what can I do to regulate myself? And then go ahead and, go wild with experimenting every one of them. So you create this toolbox of, let's say, I know that when I reach into this and I kind of pull out a strategy, this is going to reliably help me to come back to that state of regulation. So it took me months to kind of practice all these different strategies just to check it out for myself. Because like what I shared earlier, one thing might work for you, Lu, but it might not work for me. So I can't just kind of expect that when I'm feeling dysregulated in that moment, I'm just going to take something and I'm going to try it out. Because if I haven't practiced using it when I'm not feeling low, it's very hard to kind of kick that into action when I am feeling low.
Yeah,
so I want to recommend, to our listeners, like, kind of don't wait till you feel crummy to try out some of these strategies, because your body needs to get used to you doing them. So try doing them like when you're feeling good even, so that when you're feeling down, then doing it becomes more habitual.
Yeah, I think that's a really good tip there, because I think we're unique humans. No strategy is going to apply to all of us. So I think developing our own toolbox is, it's actually like, it sounds like a fun project, to be honest. Yeah, like because this is actually funny. Going back to the point of, if you remember, we were discussing Viktor Frankl's book. We were talking about purpose, and now it's kind of coming back to me, the conversation I had the other day. Basically, we talked about the fact that, if you don't know what your purpose is, then discovering your purpose is kind of a purpose. So I want to weave that in, because, if you are kind of lost and you're feeling really low and you're kind of like below that window of tolerance and you're kind of like, I don't know what to do in my life, you know what? Developing your toolbox for self-regulation might actually be a new purpose, because you're improving yourself. And we're here talking about well-being to improve our lives, improve our well-being, and essentially becoming better humans is kind of the goal, right? Which is why our audience are tuning into this episode. So I think it is a really great purpose, that we can all look at. It's like a common thing, because I do believe that, if we're better people, we'll build a better society. Most of the problems we have in our society right now is because we don't self-regulate very well. And so we, sort of like let it manifest and let it affect other people. So yeah, I really like that you mentioned, those two aspects that our audience can try. And I do wish that we will see a lot of results there, and if anyone started to develop their toolbox and they find something interesting about this topic, I would love to hear from them. We would love to hear from them in the comment section of this episode, maybe. So like, if you are tuning in and you're kind of like, I want to talk about this more, drop us a line. I don't know about you, Melissa, but I would keep an eye out for that and participate in that conversation.
I would, and I want to tell our listeners, go fun with it, like have a lot of fun with it, because some of my clients, they actually sort of bring a actual box, and then so they design it, they maybe do some collage on it, so it becomes like a concrete place that they go to for
Oh,
those more
wow.
clients who like that. And then putting in those things, maybe some trinkets, let's say, for those who likes to self-soothe by maybe touching something nice and furry or a blanket. So it becomes literally like a toolbox of that contributes to your well-being, your psychological regulation. So listeners who like to do like crafts or love to do things with their hands, go wild with it. Like, and I would love it, like, if in the comment section, or even if they could kind of show us a picture of, let's say, the toolbox. I would love to look at it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love that. Well, thank you for sharing that. And now it's our time to move on to open mic, because I believe we have covered self-regulation in depth, and now is the time just to take action. So, while we're waiting for people to share results, let's hear more from you, because I'm sure you are passionate about lots of different areas. We've talked about, self-regulation, which is a very fun one today. Breaking bad habits, that is important in our lives. But what else do you think matters? And, what else would you like to share with us today?
I want to go back to, what I shared about the training that I went to right at the beginning when we started talking.
Yeah.
So the internal family systems, it's actually, I still could kind of tie it to self-regulation, but then so let me share a little bit about that. Have you heard about that, Lu? The internal family systems?
No, I haven't actually.
Okay. I love that because it's kind of a concept that talks about how in every person there are many different parts of us that, let's say, even if let's say today I feel like going to this place, but there's another part of me that feels like I probably shouldn't go. Even in that simple sentence, we are already kind of in touch with these two different parts. So the internal family systems really talks about looking at our internal kind of world as having different parts that are like different family members. So whenever we experience inner conflict, generally it's because there are either two or more parts that are against each other. So the whole kind of idea is that we start to learn how to dialogue with these different parts of us. So being like the mediator and coming to this place of negotiation, this connection, and integrating these different parts so that internally you feel more coherent as a whole. So, like internally, the family that you have inside is one that is loving, compassionate, able to work out differences in a way that is healthy, in a way that is functioning. So if I link it to self-regulation, let's say I have this part that turns to the tub of ice cream. And then, another part that's like, no, don't do that. Why do you keep doing that? Then internally there is that conflict that generally is there when you find that, you're engaging in a behavior that you'll regret later. So we're kind of almost visualizing ourselves going in and talking to these two different parts, understanding why from each of these parts, helping each part listen and kind of try to step into their shoes. Because if you understand and accept another person, it's very hard to be critical and harsh towards them. So that's the same kind of concept that we're doing here. And the internal family systems is kind of a modality that helps us move towards a deeper relationship with yourself. And it is assuming that you are able to mediate those conflicts on your own. So I would kind of really recommend that, let's say, if listeners kind of want to read up on it, there are a couple of books that, let me see. Oh, I'm going to recommending books that could.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, great. Yeah, it's great. It's open mic, you can go crazy with it, go add as many books as you want.
There's this book called No Bad Parts.
Mm.
So, I mean, just the title alone kind of tells you how accepting and non-judgmental we're talking about. So, no matter what part, let's say, is engaging in whatever behavior that we feel guilty about, it's about holding that sense of compassion and understanding that at the end of the day, actually, none of us really want to intentionally hurt ourselves, whether it's from, excessive eating, whether it's from drinking or any other habits. At the end of the day, we engage in these behaviors to regulate ourselves. So if we can see that, then we can stop attacking ourselves for those behaviors and really look at how do we help this person who is obviously struggling? How do we help them regulate themselves in a way that's going to help them feel good and that's going to be sustainable for them? So I love this modality because it completely aligns with my value of being an advocate for good mental health, and actually being an advocate for the fact that therapy does not need to be only for people who have been diagnosed, who are on medication, who think that like there is something, let's say, wrong with them, because therapy is pretty much a space that is safe and nurturing, which means if you just come in wanting to move towards growth and well-being, that's a space for you as well. So I want to destigmatize the fact that people that come to therapy necessarily means that there is something completely wrong with them, something that needs to be fixed. I don't believe in that at all. I believe that people who come to therapy are people who, let's say, are struggling on the road to being more authentic with themselves. They know like what they want, let's say, their life to look like, what values they want to have, but then along the way, they find themselves stuck. They find themselves not being able to reach there, and they're just coming in wanting some help with that. So if all of us, including our listeners, if we can just look at kind of mental health or struggles in this accepting, more compassionate manner, then do like what you say, if we become more loving and compassionate, actually a lot of things that are difficult about the world right now might make it just that little bit of shift, that little bit of positive shift that might make a whole load of difference.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely. Yeah, definitely. And that's a great message to close with. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I was immediately Googling the book you were talking about and I added it to my cart. I'm like, okay, this is interesting. And I love that it says no bad parts, healing trauma and restoring wholeness with the internal family systems model. I love that. It's definitely something that's very on brand for this show. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insights. It's been so fun talking to you. I kind of had to stop myself there because otherwise we'll just keep going. And, this podcast will be extremely long because I'm sure we can keep talking about this topic. There are a lot of angles to sort of dissect, but I believe that today we have covered the main ones that can help our audience to get started, including myself. I really learned a lot from the conversation and lots of new concepts today, especially the window of regulation. What's that word again?
Tolerance.
Window of tolerance. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, something new I've learned today. So thank you for that. And for our audience who would like to find out more about your work, where should they go?
They can go to my website, so www.melissayoong.com, and there they'll be able to find a little bit more information about me. And if, say, they would like to kind of enter into sessions with me, they can also find my contact on that as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. And again, it's been so great having you on the show and talking about this topic. I just love your calm presence. And I know you said you were a bit nervous earlier, but you did a great job. So thank you for coming on and sharing with us a bunch of great insights.
Thank you, Lu.
You have been listening to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights podcast produced by the Wellbeing Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, we.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.